Genuinely, one of the most terrifying stories I've ever read. No joke. This is a story about a mimic in the deep Himalayan mountains. The person that sent me this is called Lemon. I think that's what his name translates as. And he said he grew up quite deep in the Himalayan mountains. And one evening he was walking a goat path that he would regularly do as a child. And he said the air started to get very, very cold. And his legs started to get heavy, and the elders of his village would describe this feeling as dark silt, which meant that a creature, a dark spirit known as I had to translate this, a bikal, was around. Now, I think in Western culture, we would refer to this spirit as a mimic. That's what I think it's most closely related to. So Lemon said he was walking along this goat path and he felt this heaviness, this dark silt. And in the distance, he saw a friend, a neighbour by the name of Tashi. Now, him and Tashi had grew up together. They played with each other quite a lot, but he knew that Tashi wasn't allowed out at this time of night in the mountains. He said Tashi was wearing his usual red poncho and he was kind of crouched down on the floor. So Lemon started calling out to Tashi, but Tashi didn't respond how you'd expect him to respond. He said as he got closer, he realised that the poncho that Tashi was wearing was far too tight, and this creature, Tashi, turned around and did a movement that, honestly, inhuman. He said its arms and legs twisted and so did its neck, revealing Tashi's face, but it was imperfect. It wasn't quite Tashi's face. He says its eyes were so far back and quite hollow, and its teeth looked like slate chopped up in its mouth. Lemon knew right then that this creature was not his friend Tashi, and he knew from his village and from his elders that this was the Bikal. He said the creature was doing these weird, jagged movements towards him and was slowly, in Tashi's voice, trying to say, "Help me," and it came closer to him. I have got goosebumps. What the hell? And I'm in the woods right now. He then said the creature very quickly switched up and stood up straight. And then from that, he realised that the trousers that he was wearing were too tight. The shoes that he was wearing that were Tashi's were too small, and it looked like his legs and feet were stuffed into these child shoes. And as Lemon stood there in shock, he said this creature stood up straight and then started to mimic Lemon's movement. So when Lemon took a step back, the Bikal took a step forward. When Lemon turned his head, the Bikal turned its head. Now, the elders in his village said that the Bikal don't like iron. Iron is a defense against the Bikal, and he said that it's quite common in their culture to carry either iron keys or just something iron with them, and he gripped the iron keys in his pocket very tight. As the creature was coming closer, Lemon said that he didn't want to risk anything, so he just gripped hold of his keys, abandoned his goats, and ran straight back to his village. He ran straight to Tashi's house and knocked on the door and said to Tashi's mum when she opened the door, "Where's Tashi? Where's Tashi?" And she said, "Tashi's in bed. Where else would he be?" And Lemon said that confirmed to him that the creature that he saw was some dark spirit mimic, hoping to entice him. When Lemon got home, he noticed that his hands were really hurting, and he looked down at his hand, and the iron keys that he was holding had left a scar that he still has today. He's also sent me a photo of that, and he described this mark as when you stick your tongue on a frozen lamppost and have to peel your tongue away. That's what the iron keys were doing in his hand. He told his parents, who told the elders of his village what had happened, and the elders did something in their culture to kind of protect him, but they always were quite wary at him because the Bikal only really shows itself to, I guess, unlucky people. He said the thing that saved him that night was the Bikal, or the mimic, was not quite an exact match. And he said this thing couldn't get Tashi's face just right, because if it was Tashi, who knows where Lemon would be today. Stories like this blow my mind. The story was written beautifully, but there were some words that couldn't be translated in English, including that in their village they have some stones and it said painted with ochre to protect the village from dark spirits. But people believe these stories to be folklore, but folklore has to originate from something. And when you hear about different spirits around the world, like a Bacall, it seems very similar to a mimic in Western culture, like how something has to happen for multiple different cultures to experience it. I hope I've worded that right. A bizarre, fascinating, beautiful story. If you have one just like it, email me. The link is in my bio.
So the lady in the story's name is Monica. She said that this happened to her when she was a child and they lived in Guadalajara. So she says that she's always been into the paranormal, but it was only because of this very first paranormal experience that she's had. So back then, she explains that they didn't have a lot of money. They lived in a really small one-bedroom home, and that her brother, her mom, and dad, they all slept in the same bed in the same room. At the time, she was 8 years old, and she still remembers this experience like if it was yesterday. That's how crazy it was. So she ends up waking up around 4 or 5 in the morning. She's just not sure because she didn't have the time, but she woke up because she thought she heard somebody in the kitchen, which she can see clearly out of that bedroom. She ends up seeing a shadow in the kitchen, so she knows it's her mom making breakfast and making lunch for her dad so that he can eat when he wakes up and have lunch for when he goes to work. She explains how her mom had the habit of cooking with the lights off because she was scared she was gonna wake up everybody else. Again, the house was really small and they could see everything from the bedroom to the kitchen and the kitchen to the bedroom. She would always help her mom out, like even if she woke up a little late, she knew that it was her job to wake her dad up so that he could start getting ready as the mom was cooking in the kitchen. It was important for her dad to wake up a little earlier so that he can get ready and have breakfast before he went to work. She tried to wake her dad up, but he wouldn't wake up. It was like he was in a very deep sleep. She turned to the kitchen and she could see that her mom's shadow is now looking at them, her trying to wake her dad up. She notices that her mom starts walking slowly to the bedroom, and when she gets to the door, it's almost like she's extending her arm, so she knows that she needs to wake her dad up. So she turns around and starts like trying to wake him up, like, "Dad, wake up." And it gets to the point where she's screaming at him, Dad, wake up, you're gonna be late, wake up." She turned to her mom and she noticed that the mom was at the door of the bedroom and it looked like she was reaching for a lamp. She said that they would always leave a lamp on to go to sleep, but it looked like she was trying to reach for the lamp, but she couldn't quite like get the lamp. As her mom was doing whatever she tried to do with the lamp, she said that she got louder. She started screaming at her dad, wake up, wake up. And that is when she finally heard her mom's voice say, "What do you want? Go to sleep." She felt like as something punched her on her chest. She says that her blood pressure went crazy because her mom's voice was coming from behind her where her mom was asleep and not by the fucking door. Mind you, her dad was obviously on the other side, so her mom was to her back, not even thinking like her mom was there because obviously mom was in the kitchen where she saw her. Her mom was not that shadow that was in the kitchen, not the shadow that was walking towards the door, and definitely not that shadow that now she realizes was trying to turn off the lamp. She is now staring at this shadow, you know, the shadow that clearly looked like it could be her mom. And she explains that the shadow is now walking backwards very slowly into the kitchen until it just like disappears in the darkness. If that was me, everybody in that room would be awake and they would all be awake. Hell no, I would not be seeing this by myself. Fuck that. Also, her mom obviously had just woken. I would have like, excuse the fuck out of me. Are you my real mom or is that thing? But there was obviously the real mom sleeping next to her, yeah. But I would have woken her ass up like, "You're already awake, let me fucking tell you what just happened." She says that after she lost sight of, you know, this shadow, she immediately covers herself from head to toe and doesn't want to see this thing again. She slept with a blanket over her face that night, the second night, the following night, every single fucking day after that happened. She slept with her face covered with a blanket for years after this happened. It was so bad that her parents would tell her, "Hey, don't go to sleep like that. What if you suffocate yourself? What if like something happens, you get too hot or overheated? We don't want something bad to happen to you." She said that she couldn't deal with the idea of her face not being covered and maybe seeing this shadow again. She explains how she feels a little guilty for even thinking that that was her mom, because if she remembers the shadow clearly, this shadow seemed darker than the night, like darker than everything surrounding it. She is an adult now and she just like will never forget this night, like ever in her life. It was the scariest thing that's ever happened to her. But what do you guys think? Have you ever experienced something like this before?
The person that sent me the story called it dark accumulated energy. By the way, if you have a story that you'd like to share with our glitch community about glitches in the matrix, dreams, aliens, cryptids, or the paranormal, you can send it to this email address. And remember, we believe you. Hi, Jess. Hi. Things happen to me sometimes, but I don't know if I notice it more because my mother is deeply spiritual and a white witch. So 8 years ago, I had a newborn. I had finally left my alcoholic partner, who, by the way, was a good man, just an alcoholic, and I'd given him an ultimatum which he couldn't stick to. For about 5 months prior to me giving birth, we would argue. His drinking was just a hard boundary for me. I had a 9-year-old and couldn't see a way through with my partner. When he left the home, I was sad, alone, breastfeeding a newborn, single motherhood that had struck me for the second time. My newborn would wake every 2 hours at night, and I'd feed him laying awake with nothing but my thoughts. Is my lips matching up with my video? I feel like I'm like a little glitchy. Mostly negative about failing my children, failing myself, my family, trying to imagine what my future now would look like. You know, the hardship. When my newborn was around a month old, I would dream of a dark figure watching us from above. It was scary, and I'd wake up startled, trying to peer into the dark night, looking for a shadow on my ceiling. I'd get my phone flashlight and scour the room from my bed to find nothing. However, the dark feeling stayed all night, every night. The feeling I was being watched from above or from across the room where my IKEA wardrobe stood, completely closed each night, the dark figure, male and menacing, dream would come. Each night, the figure felt scarier and closer, until one night before I had this dream, I was feeding the baby. I looked up to the ceiling. Some light trickling in my room from the bathroom. There was a shadow on the ceiling. The shadow felt manly, scary, and almost like a man's shadow being cast from somewhere in the room. I grabbed my phone, put on the flashlight quickly but secretly, and then I scanned the entire room. Shadow gone and nobody but me and the baby in that room. I really wanted to check the cupboard, but the baby was attached to boob and I was also scared to check. After the baby went back to sleep, I grabbed a lamp and put it in the bedroom. I slept with the lamp on every night after that. The wardrobe where I kept my clothes started to smell musty, like old moth-eaten clothes, and all of my clothes started to smell exactly like the cupboard. The smell was horrid. The only way I can explain the smell is if you've kept clothes wrapped in a bag in the attic for years and finally opened the bag. Does anybody else actually like that smell? I know that sounds really weird, but I actually like that old musty smell on clothes. I was scared walking past the cupboard. That part of the room started looking a little bit darker, even during the day. Like that part of the room didn't get much light, even though my bedroom window was directly opposite where that wardrobe sat. My newborn was quickly becoming 3 months old, and this dark energy was still looming. The dreams started becoming worse. I would wake up startled, and with my eyes wide open, I could swear I saw this dark figure, almost like I woke up from a dream into a dream, but I was wide awake. I was co-sleeping, so I would cuddle my baby closer to me, trying to protect him. If I can feel this darkness, surely he can. That's when I finally told someone about it. I told my mother, told her the dreams had gone on since my ex left, etc., and she put a plan into place for me. Say a protection prayer every night and recharge the prayer when I woke up to feed the baby each time. So I did. I prayed for protection over the entire house while in my mind covering the entire house with a bright white lighted bubble manifesting from the inside of me, from my soul. Praying for my guardian to watch over the bubble. My guardian is a huge diamond white spider, female of course. She would wrap the entire bubble in her web. While building the bubble for myself and covering the house while praying, also the bubble would force out the darkness. So imagine darkness bouncing off and away from the outside of the bubble. Nothing, and I mean nothing, could penetrate the force from my protection prayer/spell. After the first night of my prayer, I cleaned every mirror in my home and rubbed raw garlic in all the corners, or if it was circular, I'd rub the entire outer rim in raw garlic, while chanting the Lord's Prayer and saying nothing evil can reside in this home. It worked, Jess. I stopped nightmaring, I didn't feel scared, and the smell of the wardrobe was still there and on my clothes, but oh well. Yes, because your words are powerful, and your visualization and bubbling and protection, it all works. It's all powerful. I'm so proud of you and proud of your mom, W Mom. Nope, I guess that just meant it hadn't truly gone. Oh, shit. The fear and nightmares couldn't touch me at night in my bedroom anymore, but it trickled back during the day. My baby was 5 to 6 months old, and I started to feel uneasy, not scared, but like something was watching me from my stairway while me and my baby were downstairs. The baby would start to cry if I left him to use the toilet downstairs or if I had to go to the kitchen. I knew it wasn't just attachment issues. I knew he could feel it as well. Okay, fine. Now he comes with me everywhere, like a hip accessory. Let's keep my baby safe and happy. This happened for about 2 weeks, and I hadn't noticed before, but the unease became stronger over time. I found myself rushing past the hallway by the stairs, a few times while on the toilet. The toilet sits directly opposite the staircase. I swear I saw movement or a shadow or something on that stairs. It gives me a yuck feeling just typing all of this out. I'm definitely going to say a prayer after typing this, and you should pray after reading it as well. Anywho, one day I was enjoying the day with my baby. Floor play, bouncy swing, nursery rhymes, all the cute things, when all of a sudden I had this strong urge to just get out of the house, like now. Okay, I listened. I just steadily popped my shoes on, grabbed the baby and his changing bag, and all I had to do was pass the stairs. Right. Baby on left hip, bag and dog leash in the right hand, car keys in mouth, and I ran past that stairs, which were on my right, and out the front door. Phew! Slamming it behind me. I got in the car, prayed for protection, and nothing to follow us. Where did I go? Mommy's house. Remember, my mother is deeply spiritual and she is a white witch. I told her everything while crying and through gritted teeth, also because this thing ran me out of my home. We rang in the reinforcements. My sisters, LOL. We devised a plan. Who's doing what? Left the kids with one sister and set off to my house. White sage, holy water, large bird feather, and good prayer in hand. If you guessed it, yes, we smudged the house. Some people call it a cleanse. One thing you need to know is that I never told my mother about the wardrobe, the exact place I felt like the darkness in my bedroom or the smell on my clothes. I guess I didn't want to make a bigger deal than it being a dark energy giving me night terrors. My mother blesses us all with holy water. We started the smudging from my room furthest from my front door, going through every room. She was taking the sage smoke with the feather from every corner, even the large built-in storage cupboards. I had a few. I was behind her with a protection prayer that mentions a war angel, and my sister was behind me with a smaller smudge stick copying my mother's moves. While I was reading this particular prayer, my mother and sister were reciting the Lord's Prayer in unison. We passed the stairs very easily with zero issues. However, when we got to my bedroom, we all took a deep breath like we were steadying ourselves. I felt powerful, like I was ready for battle. My mother asked me to stay at the doorway and my sister followed her. I kept reading the prayer and they kept reciting the Lord's Prayer. She smudged everywhere and she went to pass my wardrobe but paused and opened the doors. She smudged every corner and carried on. We finished in my older son's room and went downstairs. My mother salted all of my house's entryways while my sister and I washed the mirrors and rubbed garlic like I did before. We placed a pocket mirror at the front part of my house's window facing outward to reflect any negative thoughts back on others. We did the same in the upstairs of my house that faces at the back. Then my mother asked for a small bowl, one I don't use often, so I got one. She half filled it with holy water and placed it at the top of my wardrobe in my bedroom. It clicked. I said, "Mom, why are you doing that?" And she just said, "This is where the darkness was hiding." I couldn't believe it. She knew exactly where it was. She said, "There's a bad smell in there. It'll be gone by the time the white sage smell leaves." I just hugged her. I told her about the wardrobe and the musty smell and the fear and the lot. She just smiled and said, "I'm a witch, love. I know where these things hide." From that day until I moved 3 years later, I never felt scared or even had a bad dream again. The bowl of holy water stayed until I moved. However, it was refilled from time to time, but when I moved, we demolished the wardrobe just in case. I now know or feel that the fear, bad dreams, smell, glimpses of shadow, movement was all a buildup of all the negativity from the arguments, the breakup, the sadness, and the anger I felt for my ex, the negative thoughts about my life and myself. All these dark negative energies build up over time, and if we're not careful, we may just create a poltergeist for ourselves. Luckily, I sought help before that, but it was definitely getting to that point. Always protect yourselves and loved ones in prayer, and only after showing your gratitude. With kindest regards and the warmest of hugs. I don't know if you want me to say your name, so I'm not going to, but I love you. Oh my God, that was such a good one. I'm so glad that you are good, that your mom is a witch, that she knew exactly what to do and how to fix everything, and that she knew exactly where it was. That is so crazy, where it originated from. And that makes so much sense because that happens all the time with negative trauma situations and energy and negative shit can create and manifest entities like that. And that was so scary. I'm glad you're okay. Thank you so much for sharing your story. Let me know what you guys think in the comments.
Something trapped me on a mountain trail and made me loop the same section over and over again for hours. This is Scared with Jess, and today's story is about the dark figure that I saw every time the forest went silent that day. I first realized something was wrong when I passed the same fallen tree for the third time. I had gone hiking alone that afternoon on a mountain trail about 40 minutes from where I lived. It wasn't supposed to be a difficult hike. The trail was clearly marked, the weather was good, and according to the map near the parking lot, the entire loop should have taken a little under 2 hours. I had plenty of daylight left, and for the first 20 minutes, everything was normal. I passed a few people heading back towards the parking lot, but after that, I didn't see anyone else. The trail got quieter as I went further into the trees. I remember stepping over a large fallen pine that was blocking part of the path. Its roots had been ripped out of the ground and were sticking up beside the trail. There was a faded blue marker attached to one of the branches. I took a picture because the roots looked strange and almost like a giant hand coming out of the dirt. I kept walking, and maybe 20 minutes later I reached another fallen tree. At first I didn't think anything of it, and then I saw the blue marker. I stopped and looked at the roots, and it was the tree from the picture. I pulled out my phone and compared them. It was the same broken branches and the same exposed roots. Even the rocks around the trunk were in the same places. I thought the trail must curve around more than I realized. It was a loop after all. Maybe I had already reached the part that brought me back towards the beginning. But that didn't make sense because I hadn't seen any connecting trails, and I had only been walking for around 40 minutes. I continued anyway. The next section of trail went uphill and curved through a thick patch of trees. About 15 minutes later, I reached the fallen pine again, and that was when I started to get nervous. I knew I had been walking forward the entire time. I hadn't turned around. I hadn't taken another path, and there was no way I should have reached the same tree 3 times. I checked the trail map on my phone. The app opened, but the location marker wouldn't move. It just sat in one place spinning like it was trying to figure out where I was. I looked at the time, and it was a little after 3. I decided to keep moving because the trail was still clearly visible. I thought maybe the app was wrong and I was panicking over nothing. And that was when I noticed how quiet it had become. I couldn't hear any birds, there was no wind in the trees, and I couldn't even hear insects. The forest had been full of noise when I started, but now there was nothing except the sound of my shoes hitting the dirt. Even that sounded strange, muffled almost, like the air around me was absorbing it. I walked faster, and then I heard buzzing. It started suddenly and was so loud that I stopped walking. It sounded like a huge swarm of bees or flies was right beside my head. I looked around, expecting to see insects, but there weren't any. The noise seemed to be coming from deeper in the trees. And that was when I saw the figure. It was standing uphill from me beside 2 pine trees. It was extremely tall, tall enough that at first I thought I was looking at a burned tree trunk. And then I saw the shape of its head and arms. It was completely dark. I couldn't see clothing or skin or any features. Its body was thin and its arms hung much lower than they should have. It was standing perfectly still, and I don't even think it was breathing. I stared at it for a few seconds, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. And then I looked down at my phone to see if I had service, but when I looked back up, it was gone. The buzzing stopped at the exact same time. Everything became silent. I started walking quickly. I kept telling myself it had been another hiker standing in the shadows. Maybe the light made them look taller somehow. Maybe they moved while I checked my phone. But I knew that wasn't what I saw. A few minutes later, I passed a bent wooden trail sign, and the lettering was worn away, but one corner had been broken off. And then I passed a large gray rock besides the trail with a white streak running through the middle. And then I reached the fallen tree again. The landmarks were repeating in the same order. The tree, the bent sign, the gray rock, and then the tree again. I started running, and it felt like I had been out there for hours. My legs were starting to ache and my mouth was dry. I kept checking the sky because I was afraid it was going to get dark before I could find my way back. But the sun never seemed to move. Every time I looked up, the light coming through the trees looked exactly the same. I tried taking a smaller trail that branched off to the left. I walked on it what felt like a half an hour, and it brought me back to the fallen tree, and the buzzing started again. I knew the figure would be there before I even looked, and this time it was standing further down the trail, still between the trees and still completely motionless, but it was closer than before. The buzzing was so loud that it hurt my ears, and I just felt this overwhelming feeling of dread when I was looking at it. I covered my ears and looked down at the ground, and when I looked up again, the figure was gone. The buzzing stopped. I kept going, and every time I completed another loop, it appeared again. Sometimes it was uphill from me, and sometimes it was standing deeper in the woods. It never walked towards me, and I never saw it move at all, but each time, it was closer. Eventually, I rounded a bend and saw it standing directly beside the trail ahead of me. It was much taller than I had realized. Its head was almost level with the lower branches. The buzzing became unbearable, and it felt like the sound was inside my skull. I couldn't make myself walk toward it. I backed away while keeping my eyes on it, and for the first time, its head moved. It tilted slightly to one side, and I turned and ran. I had been following the trail forward the entire time because I thought it had to eventually lead me out, but instead I started backtracking. I went in the direction I had originally come from, and at first nothing changed. I still passed the fallen tree and the gray rock, but they appeared in reverse order. That was the first thing that made me think I was doing the right thing. The buzzing started behind me, and I did not turn around. I could hear something moving through the trees beside the trail, and branches shifted as it kept pace with me, but I never looked over. I just kept moving. And then all at once the forest became loud again. Birds started calling from the trees, and the wind moved through the branches. I could hear insects in the grass. A few minutes later, I heard traffic somewhere below the mountain. I kept walking until the trees opened and I saw the parking lot. My car was exactly where I had left it. I got inside, locked the doors, and I checked the time. Only 1 hour had passed since I started the hike. It felt like I had been trapped on that trail for at least 8 hours. I started the car and left. And nobody ever believes me when I tell them what happened, but I won't go hiking there alone again. Anyway, good luck sleeping tonight.
When I was 16, I experienced some crazy paranormal activity, and I'm going to tell you about it. I started working at a bakery. Before it was a bakery, apparently it was a butcher's. The girls would joke around saying that the place was haunted, that the old butcher was still around, and I obviously took it as a joke. Since having that job, that's when things started happening to me. I was out the back with the other girl. There was 2 of us on the shift. We had a mirror, which was sort of in the center of the room. And so we could look up into that mirror and see who was waiting at the front counter to be served. On this occasion, I was out the back with her and I looked into the mirror. In the mirror was standing a tall, and what I could see was a man in a black cloak and a black tall hat. And I was like, I looked at the other girl and I was like, hang on, there's somebody out the front. I'm just going to go serve. It took me maybe 2 seconds to turn the corner and get to the counter. Nobody's there. I called my work colleague and I was like, hey, can you see anyone like, you know, at the window in this description? Like, I swear they were just in here. As we are standing out at the front counter, the back door slams shut and all of the taps turn on all at the same time, which is crazy. Sure, the wind could have caught the door, but at the same time that 3 taps turn on in different areas. Weird, right? I obviously didn't think too much of it. I just thought it was like such a crazy little coincidence, but I didn't put 2 and 2 together that like that person would have anything to do with that happening in the store. Anyway, I go home and for dinner that night, I was having something like quite basic. It was like beans on toast. It was something to do with toast. And I put my 2 pieces into the toaster and they were down for like 10 seconds and they popped up. And I was like, that's weird. The timer's set on like 2 minutes. So I pushed it down again and like 15 seconds later, they popped up. Pushed it down again and like 3 seconds later, they popped up. And I'm like, okay, is there a wire tripping? So I'm like so fixated on this toaster. My laptop starts playing music. Mind you, my laptop had been left at home all day and it was shut. It was shut like this. It was turned off. Like I hadn't used it in over 24 hours. It was in sleep mode or whatever. And music started playing. And let me show you what song was playing from my closed and off laptop. Please remember I'm 16 at the time. It's called You're 16, in brackets, You're Beautiful and You're Mine. Here it is on Spotify. This is what it sounds like. I'll play the chorus for you. At this point, I'm like, what the heck? I was like spooked. This was weird. I'm like telling my mom, like, hey, my laptop, like, did you use my laptop today? Like, you don't even know my password, right? Like, why is my laptop doing this? Anyway, Then once again, didn't think anything of it really, like it was just another weird thing that had happened in my day, but like whatever. Let's fast track into the night. I'm on FaceTime with my friend and it's like 1 a.m. in the morning. It's very late. I was a night owl back then. We'd been on the phone for hours and my family was asleep. Technically, me and my mum were the only two people at home. And I also had my childhood dog at home called Chester. He is a little Maltese Shih Tzu. And my mum was all the way down the other side of the house. And my dog wasn't with me. I don't know where he was, but he just wasn't with me. We were about to go to bed. And I said to her, can you see that glow in the hallway? So I had my bedroom door open and I was like, I could see this like light. It was like a circle of light in my doorway. And I turned to the phone and she was like, not really, like maybe you've left a light on like in one of your other rooms. And I was just like, yeah, okay, I'll check. All the lights were off and I was like, that's so weird. Got back into my bed. I looked directly into the hallway again. The same light is still there. And I turned my camera and I'm like, look, there is a glow in my doorway. It is a circle. I don't know what it is, but there's a glow in my doorway. And I hang up. I say goodnight to my friend. The next minute, the light is coming into my room and my dog comes out of nowhere. I have no idea where he is. He comes into my room barking his head off and he is going ballistic. He jumps up onto my bed. He sits on my chest and he barks at the door. My dog has never behaved like that ever in his life. I have never, ever seen him do that, let alone sit on my chest and bark directly at where this light is. I start to panic. It's like a feeling that comes over you, a sense of like a presence. And I was like, something's here. Something is in this room with me. And I was totally freaked out. I had just been on the phone. Remember that. I had just been on the phone to my friend. I then pick up my phone and I press to call my mother's phone number. No service. I had no service. My phone was disconnected. How can that be when I was just on my phone, on a phone call? I tried to call her like 8 times, wouldn't even ring. It just came up with, you have no service. So I am literally at this point hysterical. My dog is hysterical. I am like trying to like almost scream, but nothing is coming out. It is just like pure fear. And that is the only way that I can describe it. I just felt like pure fear in that moment. And I had no idea what was going to happen. And then it was like all of a sudden, nothing. Energy had gone. Chester had stopped barking. And he was just like sat. And the light was gone. And I tried to call my mum. And it rang through. And she answered. And I was like sobbing. And I was like, I need you to come to my room. Like, I've just had a visitor, basically. It is just one of the most insane things that I have ever experienced. And that one definitely will stay with me for life. I am a very open-minded person. And I feel like the more open-minded you are, the more likely you are to receive something like this. But yeah, I can't say that it didn't scare me. Anyway, if anybody has any experiences like this, I would love to hear it. But that is mine. That is my story time. Anyway, have the best day ever. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.
You spend a lot of time diving deep into rabbit holes, then you usually run into one problem. And that is that most of these stories begin to all sound the same. You know, somebody sees a light off in the distance in the woods. Somebody hears a voice that isn't their own or mimics their own. Somebody claims to have encountered a creature out in the woods. Before long, those stories start to spiral into like folklore and just, you know, they just become harder and harder to take seriously. Honestly, I think that's why I think that what happened in Brazil on May 19th of 1986 is truly fascinating. Because unlike most UFO stories, this one started out with professionals. Like, it was not just a random person making this extraordinary claim. These professionals were involved in work that was to identify these unidentified objects in the sky. Not even just unidentified objects, you know what I mean? Like air traffic controllers, military personnel, civilian pilots, radar operators, and eventually even the government became involved. Soon everyone found themselves encased in what would soon be known as the Night of the UFOs. So this story starts on the evening hours of May 19th. Air traffic controllers who were working in the southeastern portion of Brazil noticed something strange. They started to see these unusual lights that they had never seen before. At first glance, a bright light in the sky does not sound very remarkable. Pilots and controllers spend their whole lives looking at the sky. You know, they know what the planets look like, they know what the stars look like, they know what should and should not be there, right? But what really caught their attention was that these lights did not move like anything they had ever seen before. Like they behaved completely different than anything that they were accustomed to seeing. Soon reports came flooding in from all sorts of different locations. Some witnesses described this brilliant bright light, while others described like more yellow, green, and red lights. Objects appeared to be like moving, they would stop, and then they would change directions. Soon what started out as just an odd observation became this whole thing. And it soon became clear to the Brazilian officials that this was not just a thing that was confined to one spot in Brazil. There were multiple people throughout multiple different portions of Brazil claiming to have seen the exact same thing. One thing that doesn't really get talked about enough in this situation is that the Brazilian military really took this seriously from the start. Militaries do not generally launch aircraft just from a simple civilian saying that they saw something in the sky. You know, they have to go through procedures, chain of commands. You know, they have to go through this entire protocol before they put anybody in the sky. Yet that night, military officials became so concerned that they just took to the sky immediately without all of the protocols that they would previously have gone through. Imagine being one of those pilots and just thinking that you're going on like a routine sky trip to, you know, see what's up there, and it's just gonna have a normal explanation and everything's gonna work out fine. Wrong. Several of the Brazilian Air Force pilots were saying that they were trying to intercept these things that were just completely defying normal rules of aerial observation. Targets would appear on the radar and then just disappear. Sometimes the pilots would visually see lights that the radar was just not picking up on. One of the captain's names was Armindo Neves. Years later, he would describe this encounter as something he had never experienced before in his entire time during his aviation career. According to some of the observations from these pilots, some of these objects were moving faster than your eyes could even recognize, you know, like faster than the speed of light, basically. They seemed to move comfortably in ways that we are not familiar with. And there's the radar evidence itself, which remains one of the most intriguing parts of the story. Radar systems are not just like magical truth machines. They can be affected by atmospheric conditions, technical glitches, and even unusual environmental circumstances. Skeptics always point this out whenever it's involved in like UFO sightings and stuff, which is rightfully so. However, what makes the Night of the UFOs like really hard to explain is that this stuff was like picked up on multiple different radar systems, not just one in one area of Brazil. Lots of the officials were seeing these things on the radar, while also normal civilians were reporting seeing things down below, you know what I mean? Brazilian officials would later come out to say that there were 21 unidentified objects involved in the situation. These objects were tracked over hundreds of miles and seen over Sao Paulo and Rio de Janeiro. So this was not happening in like a rural area of Brazil or like the foresty areas of Brazil. This was happening in the most populated areas of Brazil. And you'd think that their government would try to cover this up like American governments would, but they actually came out and spoke about it. But I will say they did not come out and say that this was extraterrestrial activity. They said that something strange was happening. But of course, they're not gonna just come out and say like, yeah, we saw aliens in the sky. That would create mass chaos, right? But the military official who came out and said this to the public basically was saying that, you know, this event remains unsolved. Like, we technically don't know what the fuck those things were. We don't know what the fuck happened. And honestly, I feel like they do. I feel like they really did. I don't know if you guys know, but in Brazil, there has been a lot of extraterrestrial activity and like alien sightings and stuff. This is just one of the major ones that's like documented in their history. I believe it. I don't know if any of you guys have seen the new movie Disclosure Day yet, but honestly, knowing about this stuff and then going to see that movie was a life-changing experience. Like, I know, you know, it's just a movie, right? Blah, blah, blah. You know how they just put everything in front of your face through media so that they can later come out and say, oh, it's just a movie, it's just fake. I think that's what's happening here. Sue me if I'm wrong, I don't know. But yeah, let me know what you think of the Night of the UFOs, and let me know what you think of the movie Disclosure Day, and if you've seen it yet. I really truly think that this is one of those things they're just putting in our face just to later say, oh, it's just a movie, this is fake news. Like, I don't know. Like I said, Brazil has so many of these types of stories. There's even a crazier one that I can get into in another video if you want, where there were two girls who actually saw an alien. Honestly, I think you are foolish to believe that we are here in this universe alone. Whether they have good intentions or bad intentions, we are still not the only intelligent ones here. Honestly, I would go as far to say that we are not intelligent at all.
Appalachian stories are always scary, but this story about a military base is going to have me struggling to sleep tonight. Grab a drink, grab a cozy blanket, and settle in while I tell you a ghost story in my garden after dark. Welcome to Ghosts in the Garden. I was stationed in England for about 3 years. I worked at a secure facility, which during the day was always buzzing with people between the military, contractors, and government civilians. I was in a fenced facility on the base, which was also fenced, and had a few different layers of security to the building itself that you had to go through. On top of that, we also had our own entry point control, ECP, with roving patrols. My point, getting into the building was only possible if you had either a badge or you blew a hole in it and absolutely nothing in between. At night, however, it was a ghost town. Usually only between 2 to 4 people. Still had their roving patrols, but they were all outside and we never spoke to them unless there was a problem, and it was a huge facility. One night, there were 3 of us working the night shift, and we had an array of monitors in there that displayed live feeds from the cameras all over the compound. It was one of those where it would show for about 10 seconds, then flip to the next feed, and then roll through them and repeat. One night, we got a call from ECP. They had motion alarms go off in one of the equipment rooms, which means one of us had to go check it out. Lucky me, my supervisor sends me. I get to the equipment point and there's nobody in sight. I pick up the phone, call to my supervisor and tell him nothing is here. Then I call the ECP and ask him if they can see me on the feed. They respond with the following words: "We have 2 of you." I just sort of looked up at the camera and tried to be as nonchalant as I could as I asked, "Where do you see the other guy?" And I get back from them, "At about your 5 o'clock. I say back, "Describe him." They say, "I can't make out his face, but he's about 6 feet tall, in BDUs, and looks like a lifter." Keep in mind, the BDUs were not our uniform and hadn't been for about 4 years. At this point, I turn around and ask, "Right there?" ECP confirms it, but there's nobody there. I asked if they had spoken to the ops floor yet, and they said no, so I hung up and called. I tell my supervisor to look at the equipment room feed. All he says is, "Who is that?" I just hang up the phone and bolted out of there, securing the door behind me, which was a 2,000-pound blast door. As I got back to the ops floor, I was fully thinking that they were messing with me. But when I came through the door, security forces were already inside. So I had to go out there again with them behind me because they still needed to be escorted. So there's 3 guys with their weapons out and little old me with nothing but a Leatherman on my belt behind them. I re-access the equipment room door and they go in. Eventually, they clear the room. The phone in the equipment room rings, I pick it up, and now there's motion alarms going off all over the facility, all in places that have been fully sealed and secured for the night. We end up calling the main base command post to tell them that we might have a problem. Security force spends the next hour and a half clearing the entire facility. At that point, we have already notified our commander and his staff, so everyone is tracking it. Unfortunately, the video feed didn't record at the time, so we had nothing to go back and review. But the ECP supervisor on duty and my supervisor had seen it separately, and the motion detection system did record that. So we were at least able to have that one thing to confirm something did happen. Each alarm was on its own individual circuit and hardwired to the ECP. Nothing was digital. 1 or 2 having an issue, that's fine, but there were over 30 that detected something moving around. All of this happened just after midnight, so we were stuck in this facility afterward for about another 4 hours until the morning crew came to relieve us. But because of everything that had happened, we didn't get to leave until 2 or 3 hours after our 12-hour shift ended because we had to debrief the commander and his staff. Also, something we didn't think about at the time, but now makes me shiver, is that these were not low-quality cameras. They said they couldn't make out a face on this man, but you could practically count the eyelashes on people's face from 40 feet away with these cameras. You could see my face clear as day, but they could not make out the other guys. The story was very creepy at first, but then I started to doubt the validity of it, until I found out that there are news articles about this military base and the ghost that haunts this building. This is not the only encounter. I found that there are multiple people who have seen the same man. Who do you think he is? Why is he haunting this building, and what does he want? Please let me know in the comments, and if you have your own story to share, I would absolutely love if you'd send it over to me. Thank you again for joining another scary story after dark in my garden. Bye.
There's an old saying that you should always close your curtains at night because you can allow what's outside to be invited in. Now, this is a story from Eastern Tennessee. There was this man named Levi, And Levi said he lived in this house that was right next to the woods. And he said this particular night, he went to bed as usual, and he started having this dream. And he said in this dream, there was this man staring at him from his bedroom window. Said he had pale white skin, no nose, no mouth, and these solid black eyes. And on top of his head, he had a couple scraggly pieces of hair. And he said he was just looking at him in this dream. And then all of a sudden, he said he heard a voice say, "Come outside." And he wakes up, and he said right away he looked out his window, and sure enough, that man was standing outside of his window. And then he just took off into the woods. So he was kind of a little freaked out by that, but was like, maybe I was just dreaming that still, and it was all in my head. Until he looks at the window and he sees what looks like a face print. A couple weeks later, David said, he goes to sleep, and this time he has a dream. He's in his house and he's walking into his kitchen. And he said when he looked out his back kitchen door, he could see this same man, creature, whatever you want to call it, outside on his back porch. And he said this thing was sort of bent over and it was pacing back and forth, just moving its shoulders. He said it then stopped at the door window and it turned and it looked at him and it said, "Come outside." And he said he woke up and he was like, man, that dream just felt like really real. So he walks out to his back porch and he looks, there's no one out there. But when he looks down at the snow on the porch, he can see what look like footprints. So David didn't know, Levi didn't know what to make of this. And he, at the time, just thought, it was just bad nightmares he was having. So a couple weeks later after this, he goes to bed again one night. And he says he has this dream. And in this dream, once again, he's in his bedroom, laying in his bed. And he says he hears the front door open. And he said all of a sudden he heard footsteps kind of, moving through the living room, down the hallway. And then his door opens. And he said in walks this white creature, bent over with its shoulders kind of moving as it walked. And he said he came right over to his bed and it sat on his stomach. And he said the whole time he just couldn't move. He said this thing just kind of was like smiling at him as it's sitting on top of him. And he said it turned and it looked at him and it said, "I said, come outside." And then he said he lifted up his arm and it scratched him right on his side. He wakes up and it was like, that seemed all too real. He lifts up his shirt and in the place where he got scratched in the dream, he had this huge scratch. And so the next day, he goes to his neighbor's house and he's like, "Hey, this is going to sound weird, but like, have you ever seen sort of like a weird guy that's been, looking in windows or anything?" And he said his neighbor just turned and had this like shocking look on his face. And he was like, "You mean the pale white guy with, a couple strands of hair and the solid black eyes?" And he's like, "Yeah, how did you know?" And he goes, "When I first moved here, I used to leave my curtains open and I would see him peeking in my window and he would tell me to come outside." And he said, so after that, I started keeping my curtains closed at night. And so Levi said after he had heard that, he never slept at night without the curtains closed in his bedroom.
Spooky scary story time. So I live very close to Sutter Buttes. It's the smallest mountain range in the whole world. I mean, the scenery is beautiful, honestly, like when you drive up there. But there is an eerie vibe because there's areas where you are like not allowed to hike on. Some areas are protected by government, so you like cannot step foot on those parts of the mountain. I guess there is some trails where you can actually walk on, but I haven't actually like went out there, hiked or anything. These mountains are actually a volcano, but it's dormant. I don't know when is the last time they actually erupted. Or I hope they won't ever erupt again. So when I was younger, my mom mostly worked in the fields, right? She would get up super early to be at work. And this one time, she had to go past Sutter Buttes super early in the morning. She said it must have been like 4:30 in the morning. So I guess as they were approaching the mountains, she said they seen a big fireball in the sky. She said this ball appeared out of nowhere. It was literally on top of the mountains, and it seemed like it was just floating there. And as they were driving closer, it seemed like the fireball was literally approaching them. So the driver didn't know, like, do they stop? Do they keep going? Like, what do they do? And according to my mom, she said, the ball was there not even like a minute when it vanished. Like, she said this thing disappeared. The same way we saw it appear, it disappeared. She said they even pulled over to try and see where this fireball had went. And I guess there was nothing in the sky. My mom said there was not even a trace that such thing had ever been there. And when my mom told us, I kind of asked her, like, well, what do you think it was? We thought maybe like a meteor or something, but mom said, like, no, it's not a meteor. Then we questioned, like, was it an alien? Like, but she has, like, no clue as to what it could have been. I guess what they found, like, super weird was the fact that there was no other car on the road when they saw it, and how fast it appeared and just vanished.
An email from someone who says that she used to work for the major crimes team for a rural police force in the UK, and she has a case involving 2 phantom cars that still haunts her today. She wanted to remain anonymous because the story involves her work as well as a victim who will also remain anonymous. But one day her team got a call about a hit and run case in which a motorcyclist had come off of his motorcycle and hit a pole and instantly passed. There were multiple witnesses from houses along the road, including a retired traffic officer, who all reported the same thing, seeing a white van pulling a trailer, which was followed by a clipping sound and the sight of the motorcyclist clipping the back of the trailer, which then caused him to come off the bike. So her team set about trying to find the white van with the trailer, which was no longer at the scene, and that's when things got very strange. She says the incident occurred in a small town with one road in and one road out, and both roads were covered by cameras. And they had footage from that day, and they could see the motorcyclist as well as a small group of cars and a green van who entered the town, and they saw them all come out the other side. But at no point in the footage was there a white van with or without a trailer. Thinking that the camera must have missed picking up the van entering the town, the team canvassed every single house, driveway, storage facility, and parking area in the town. But she says they found no white van and no trailer. And normally they would have just assumed that this was an eyewitness error. But she said with the amount of people who had witnessed seeing the accident, including a man whose entire career had been based on noticing vehicles and their details, left them completely stumped. The only thing left that they could do was to try to track down the other drivers who had entered the town and been in the same section of the road at the time of the accident to see if those drivers could provide clarification. 3 cars that had been on the road when the accident occurred were fairly easy to trace because their license plates had been caught by the cameras exiting the town, and 2 of those drivers had actually pulled over when the accident occurred to wait for police. Both of the drivers who stopped to wait said that they hadn't actually witnessed the accident occurring. They said that they came up to the aftermath of the accident once it happened. They found the driver of the other car, the one that had been first on scene. They said that they hadn't actually seen the accident occur, but had also come up on it a moment after it had happened and had actually seen a white van pulling a trailer turning up in the distance. This confirmed the other eyewitness accounts that a white van and a trailer had been involved. It took the team a while to track down the driver of the green van, but they eventually did, and his story was even more bizarre. He said that he had actually seen the accident occur and that he was driving in front of the white van with the trailer and saw the accident happen in his rear view, but that he and his wife were late for a ferry and so they couldn't stop. When asked what happened that caused the accident, the driver of the green van said that the motorcyclist had attempted to pass the white van, but in passing saw that a red car was coming in the opposite direction, which caused him to pull back and get back behind the white van, but miscalculated the distance, which caused him to clip the trailer. He described the white van, the trailer, and the red car in full detail, as did his wife, who was sitting in the passenger seat beside him. But the thing was, there was no other record of the red car besides the first driver who had come up on the scene and driven away. There was no record of the red car entering or leaving the town, and no other eyewitnesses had reported anything about a red car. Stranger still, the description of the red car by both the driver of the green van and his wife, as well as the driver of the first car that came on the scene, was identical. No red car matching that description was owned or registered by anyone who lived in the town. Because the town had also been canvassed that day, they also knew that it was not parked anywhere between the cameras. Ultimately, she says they had no other choice but to close the case and call it an accident caused on behalf of the motorcyclist, but it left them all completely baffled. Two phantom vehicles that were witnessed by multiple people caused an accident and then vanished into thin air. She said it's been 10 years and it still gives her the chills to think about, and she has no other explanation other than the veil must have been thin that day. Let her know what you think in the comments, and if you have a spooky scary story time you think no one would believe or something that still unsettles you, please send it in. We would love to hear it.
Ladies, just because you have 2 kidneys doesn't mean that you need to be giving one to a man. I am back with another spooky story, and this one, it's a cautionary tale. We're gonna call the person who submitted the story Kenzie. So Kenzie met Paul when she was about 15 years old, and ever since the pair met, they hit it off right away. They had a best friends first type of relationship before they even made it official. They were friends for about 2 years before they decided to become boyfriend and girlfriend. Paul and Kenzie had a lot in common. They were both struggling in the hood. I mean, they were kids. So they spent a lot of their time daydreaming together and manifesting and thinking about how grand the future is going to be for them. Paul had all of these big dreams that honestly really inspired Kenzie. Before Paul came around and started making these promises of wealth in his future, Kenzie just kind of thought that that life would never be possible for her. At this point, they're dating, but remember, they were best friends first. Kenzie said that she had never fallen for a man like that. Paul was the love of her life. She understood and saw parts of Paul that no one else was able to see. Fast forward into their 20s, Paul went to LA and started working in the music industry. Now, Kenzie wasn't the biggest fan of her man being in the music industry. However, that man was bringing in racks. Everything that they talked about as teenagers and living the life that they wanted to live, the wealth, the money, the cars, the mansion, it was all becoming possible right in front of Kenzie. What she appreciated was the fact that Paul always held his promises. They were young, he promised to get her a car. Well, now that he's making all this money in his 20s, actually bought Kenzie everything he said that he was going to get her. Fortunately, on the age of 25, so years into their relationship, Paul fell sick and he was really sick. Long story short, they go to the doctors and they figure out that his kidney was failing and that he needed a kidney transplant. Kenzie said it was a no-brainer for her. She thought she was about to lose the love of her life. She found out that she was compatible to give her husband her kidney. She thought it was a sign from God. Long story short, they went through the operation and she gave that man her kidney. After they made a speedy recovery, they spent so much money on hospital bills that they needed to actually catch up. Paul decided that it's best for the family to move to LA. He'll go back working in the music industry. Without Paul having a battery in his back, Paul had a brand new kidney. When they moved to LA and Paul went back to work, everything was going great until it wasn't. Long story short, Kenzie decided to check that man's phone. If you want to lose weight, go through my phone. My bad. And when Kenzie went through that man's phone, Kenzie found out that this man had been cheating on her for years with multiple women, actively reading text messages between her man and other women, warning them that he tested positive for gonorrhea, and then found out that he had a girl pregnant. At this point, Kenzie officially spiraled. Kenzie may not be able to get her kidney back, but she decided that she was gonna get her leg back. Being that her entire family from Uganda is involved in magic, Kenzie sought out to seek revenge. Based on how the story ends, I wonder if Kenzie took it too far. If you want to find out how the story ends, go ahead and check it out on YouTube. It's the latest video on my page. I posted it 5 days ago. Anyway, check out the story time, watch the full thing, leave a comment letting me know which platform you came from. Anyway, from your favorite Haitian homegirl.
If I'm gonna be scared, you are gonna be scared with me. It is time for another spooky story. I am Autumn in Appalachia. Send me your spooky stories, add me on Facebook, and subscribe on YouTube. Same handle. Without further ado, you guys are getting a 2-for-1 special tonight because both of these stories are shorter, but man, are they creepy. So I just decided to combine them. I'm tagging both of these followers on TikTok. I didn't catch the first follower's name, so let's just call her Catherine for the video. Catherine said she is 47 years old now, that this happened when she was 5. She knows for a fact it was real, and it is something that still haunts her when she thinks about it. So she said that she lived in this lonely Texas farmhouse, and one night she's laying in bed by herself in her room. Her bedroom door is open, and she is having a particularly hard time going to sleep this night because the next day was like the first day of school, and she was really nervous about it. As she's laying there in the darkness, she sees a hand appear at the bedroom door. Something was standing outside of the bedroom door, shrouded in darkness, and all she can see is this hand. She said it is an abnormally long hand with like very sharp, long fingernails, it looked inhuman, and as it reaches around the door frame, its fingers kind of curl around the door, and then the hand begins like beckoning to her, like motioning her and waving her to come over. She said that she laid there watching it for like 5 minutes straight. She knows she was not seeing things. She knows she was not asleep, and she had never been told at this age about anything like a demonic entity or like paranormal things, and so she didn't really know any better. After watching it for a few minutes, she decides to get out of bed and walk to the door in the darkness to follow this hand that's beckoning to her. When she gets to that door, it's gone. She looks out and nothing is there. This, at this point, terrified her. She runs, gets back in the bed, covers herself up with the blanket, and just tried to wait for daylight. She said she never saw it again after that. The second story submission is from Eliza. She said that her granddad grew up in the Scottish Highlands, and around 9 or 10 years old, she had an experience in his house she'll never forget. Now, she was told by her granddad growing up as a kid that his house was haunted by a woman, but she never paid it much mind until this night. So she's spending the night over there. She and her granddad are sitting there watching movies with his 2 German shepherds, and Eliza starts getting sleepy, so she decides she's going to go put her pajamas on. Now, when she stands up, she said she got this really weird feeling. It was almost like a head rush, and she never really got that before. She's not even sure if that really has anything to do with what happened to her, but she decides she as she grabs her PJs is going to go into her aunt's old bedroom down the hallway to change into them. Her aunt did not live there anymore. As she is walking down the hallway, she starts to hear a woman singing, but she said it sounded weird. It sounded almost like old and laggy, like it's like broken up. She said it almost sounded like a radio playing or something. And as she gets closer and closer to the aunt's bedroom door, it gets louder, like it's coming from inside that room. When she gets to the doorway, she turns the doorknob and she opens it just a bit, when suddenly the door meets resistance, like somebody is standing on the other side holding it closed. And the second that Eliza felt that resistance on the door, the singing stopped. This freaked her out. So she slams the door shut, decides to go get changed elsewhere in the house, and then she goes and sits back down by her granddad, and she's like, did you have like music playing? Do you have a radio in here? And he's like, no, and I've never had a radio in this house. She does not know what to make of it. She is freaked out. She tries to put it past her as best she can, and she goes to bed. The next morning, just to try to debunk things, she goes to open that door again, and it swings open. No problems. There was nothing behind the door to hold it closed. So what was behind the door, and who was singing in that room? You guys let me know what you think in the comments. Stay tuned for some more spooky stories.
Series of spooky stories except for his woman's intuition. I had a dream about my sister at what I believe was the time that she died. I lived in Green Bay at the time, and there was a wooden walkway next to the river in the downtown area, a very busy area. We were the only people around. She was pregnant in the dream. All of a sudden, I was holding a baby, and my sister just disappeared. When I woke up, I wanted to call her and tell about my dream. I couldn't though, because California is 2 hours behind, and it was 6:30 a.m. in Green Bay, making it 4:30 in California. So I decided that I would call her after work. I got home from work. As I was walking into my house, I decided that after I dropped my stuff, I was going to call her and tell her about my dream. But my nephew called me and told me to tell me that she had passed. I was devastated. I knew in the dream that she had passed in the real world, and this was her asking me to take care of her kids. I just didn't say it because I didn't want to talk her death into existence. Last year in around February or March, I kept having this awful nagging feeling about my granddad. Something kept telling me that he wasn't going to be here much longer. I was very close to my granddad, and I decided that I wanted a professional photo shoot with him and my Nana for my 29th birthday. I kept telling my mom that I was having this constant feeling of his death, being really close, and that I didn't feel like he would be here for my 30th birthday this year. September came around and I turned 29, but my granddad was never well enough to do the photo shoot, and in late November, he went into the hospital, was diagnosed with cancer, moved to hospice, and passed away there in January of this year. I'm so gutted that I never got that photo with him. Friday, February 1st, 1991, 7:30 p.m., my aunt stopped to get pizza for her family and was going to stop by and check on my grandma. her mother. After she picked up the pizza, she was tired and felt that she should just go home. She decided to check on my grandma the next day. She found my grandma murdered in the house that following morning. It turns out that it happened when my aunt was originally going to go over to the house. Holy shit. Back in 2021, I was about 6 hours away from home for my 30th birthday trip, and I video called my grandma and was talking with her. She seemed okay. That night, apparently, she felt sick and had to go to the hospital, eventually airlifted to another one. That night, she passed. I had a dream the night that it happened. In my dream, I got a text saying that grandma passed away. I woke up and looked at my phone and nothing. I went back to sleep the same night. I woke up around midnight and I couldn't breathe and my chest hurt bad and I woke up crying. It turns out that my grandma passed away around midnight that night. I didn't know anything until I got a message the next day saying that she was a good lady. I'll miss her. Sending you love. I had to ask my mom and she told me to just get home. I already knew that something was wrong, but I didn't want to get confirmation until all the way home. We used to joke about, you can't leave me until after I'm 30. I didn't mean it, literally 5 days after. When I was in middle school, my dad wanted to take me and my brother to Florida. My mom was iffy about it. They're divorced. I ended up having a dream that me and my brother were in a wave pool in a nice hot area. In the dream, I watched my brother go down and never come up in that wave pool. He drowned. I remember waking up and being terrified. Fast forward, we never went to Florida with him and he went with his girlfriend and her kids. They ended up getting stuck in a hurricane there in Florida and couldn't come back for a bit. The Thursday before my mom died, I saw the car that my brother and sister-in-law had died in a motor vehicle accident driving behind me. I checked my mirrors 3 times, and the 4th time it was gone. I know it sounds really crazy, but the car was customized and one of a kind. You couldn't mistake it for another. It was so shiny and new looking, almost shimmering. As soon as I saw it, I knew that there was not coming out of the hospital. That same night, I dreamt of visiting my mom in the hospital, and the family that had passed I was close with was also visiting her. She looked so happy and healthy. Even my father, who I did not have any relationship with, was there, which freaked me out when I woke up. My mom died the Tuesday after that. January of this year, I was lying in bed at 11 p.m. and all of a sudden I get this feeling like something was wrong, and I had the feeling like I couldn't breathe. I told my brother who was in the room with me that something was wrong, and I started bawling, having a panic attack. 10 minutes later, my mom calls and tells me that my grandpa's house is on fire and I needed to come help walk her dogs out to our house. And when I get there, I found that she had woke up in her wheelchair because she was hot and her wall was on fire. When I was 18, I started talking to one of the guys that I went to high school with. Even though people thought that we were dating in high school, we actually didn't until sometime after. He was my first. We spent a good deal of time together when he didn't have class and I didn't have to work. One day, I went to his place. I got sick in the middle of us doing stuff. He helped me clean up and apologized that he should have insisted that we don't because he already knew that I didn't feel well. I told him I was fine and it was okay. We sat on the couch together watching the game that was on. One of his friends comes over and asked if I was okay if they smoked while I was there. He said I could go lay in the bed if I wanted. I told him that I was okay and I'd be fine. A few minutes later, he said that it was time. They're going to smoke outside. Out of nowhere, I sat up and said without blinking, "Be careful." I didn't think, it just came out. He said, "I'll be okay," as he chuckled, "We're just gonna smoke." I snapped out of it and said, "Yeah, you're right. Okay, just, I don't know, be safe, please." He kissed me on my forehead and said that he would. I ended up getting pretty sick. A couple days later, he called for me to come over, but I just didn't feel well and said that I would the next weekend. We talked a bit about me even coming for Thanksgiving, etc. A few days later, a mutual friend of ours called me and said, "I'm calling because I know that you two were talking, Destiny. Blank was shot. He died." I never regretted not seeing someone more in my life. I feel like my body just knew that something was wrong or was going to happen, just didn't know what. This year I finally saw him in a dream. He apologized for not listening and for not visiting me for so long. I cried so hard when I woke up. My mom's dream. She had a dream that she was moving into a new house. When she went to bring boxes into the bedroom, she heard something coming from the closet. It was a man. He had a gun and warned that he would shoot her. She went in to either fight him or turn and run, and he shot her in the back. She couldn't move. A few days or weeks later, our cousin was shot in the very same spot. He is paralyzed.
I gave my husband his final cup of tea tonight. I cracked my son's bedroom door open and peeked my head inside. "So, how is he?" I asked. My husband, James, was sitting on the bed with our son across his lap and stroking his hair. She stopped and held up his finger to his lips and said, "You're gonna wake him up." "Oh, sorry." I apologized and said, "I just came to tell you that I made you some tea." I eased the door open and showed him the cup. "Thank you," he replied. "You just put it on the nightstand," he said, pointing to the one that was right next to him. So as quietly as I could, I walked across the room, set the cup down, and just as quietly walked my way back out into the hallway. "Let me know if you need anything else," I whispered before fully closing the door. After I left my son's room, I just stood in the hallway until I heard the thump of the teacup hitting the floor. "I think he's out," I whispered. "Give me a second to check." So I poked my head back into my son's room, and sure enough, my husband was out cold. "It's safe for you to go in and get the body now," I said as I returned to the hallway. "You did the right thing," the medical examiner replied before gesturing for his assistant to go into the room. I feel bad about drugging my husband's tea, but I had to. It was the only thing I could think of to get the body of our son away from him and have my husband transported to a hospital where he could get the help that he needed.
Growing up, I had an imaginary friend named Sully. He told me his name was Sully, and he had jet black hair, corduroy overalls, and really nice shiny leather shoes. I met him shortly after moving into a new house in town. I didn't have a lot of friends when I was a kid. I was pretty weird, so I would look forward to coming home and having him sitting on my bed ready to play with me. He was a bit older than I was. He seemed to be about 10 or 11 years old, and I was about 6 at the time. He would always play the games that I wanted to play, but he also would ask me to play games that he wanted to play, which always involved letters. He would hand me big stacks of letters, and I never took them because I thought they were, at the time, love notes, because I thought boys had cooties, and when he would hand me these letters, I always just kind of thought they were love notes, and I would just be like, no thank you. But a constant theme was we would play my games, and then he would want to play his letter games, where we would just pass letters back and forth. But again, I would never take his letters. He always would just kind of laugh it off, like, come on, play with my letters. He would even move things around in our house, and I would watch him do it. He would like move my mom's makeup bag from her room to the bathroom and move random things in the kitchen, almost to like play a prank on me. And my mom would ask me a lot, where's my makeup bag, or where is my purse? And I would say, Sully moved it. And it became a running joke in our house. Whenever I was in trouble for something, they would say, oh, did Sully do it? Which always confused me, because I was just like, don't you know Sully? And why is it such a weird concept that he would move something? We would rearrange the toys in my room all the time. Needless to say, he was my best friend. As I got older, though, I started to see Sully less and less, and it didn't really bother me because I started to get friends, and him popping up every now and then was a surprise, but I didn't necessarily miss him when he was gone either. By the end of our time in that house, I didn't see Sully anymore, and had kind of just grown up. I was around 8 or 9 years old, and we moved to a different house, and that was the last I'd ever seen or heard or dreamt of Sully. He would visit me in my dreams too. Through the years and into my teenage years, completely forgot about Sully unless he was brought up by my family, again when they were poking fun at me if I was in trouble for something, and they would say, oh, did Sully do it? It was just a running joke in my family for a very long time. And I just chalked him up to being an imaginary friend. Then when I was about in my early 20s, I asked my mom if she remembered that house, and she said she did. And we talked about the layout of the house, and Sully was brought up. I described Sully to my mom and told her as an adult how real he was to me, and how I would watch him move things around the house. And she remembered how things would always go missing in the house and thought it was very strange. That's when we decided to look up the history of the house. We just looked up the area, the address, and the name Sully on Google. Come to find out that that house we were living in used to be an old post office, except the post office burned down in 1918, where 2 people died. Richard Montgomery and 11-year-old Sullivan Montgomery. They both tragically passed away in this fire because he worked with his dad at this post office. And I realized instantly why he was always handing me letters. It was his job. And he wasn't an imaginary friend. So that's my first interaction with the ghost. Comment your ghost stories.
Sometimes ghosts and broken chairs and left equipment's not the only thing that you can find in a haunted asylum. Sometimes the body leaves a mark. This is the Athens Lunatic Asylum, now known as the Ridges. It's in Athens, Ohio, and it was built in 1874. More than 100 years later, a woman named Margaret Schilling would disappear in its walls. What happened after she was found would turn this hospital into one of the most infamous haunted locations in America. Originally built to house a few hundred people, but by the 1950s, it had around 1,800 people in there. Here's a little before and after, and the first patient ever admitted was a 14-year-old girl with epilepsy. But let's get back to Margaret. She was a 53-year-old patient at Athens Hospital, said to be an easy-to-deal-with patient. On December 1st, 1978, Margaret went missing. She disappeared from her ward during a time when parts of the hospital were being renovated. Now, why didn't they find her? There's a lot of different versions of this story. They say that they did look for her, but they could not find her anywhere. They didn't know what happened to her. Some say they didn't look for her at all. January 11th, 1979, 42 days later, a maintenance worker found her in a part of the hospital that had been closed for renovations. All of her clothing had been removed and folded neatly beside her. The most unsettling part is what happened after they moved the body. Her body had been on that concrete for so long that it left a stain that cannot be removed. Maintenance crews tried to scrub it away. Nothing worked. It's known today as the stain. In 2007, forensic team took samples from the stain to try to figure out exactly what had happened, and what they found was consistent evidence of what's known as adipose cera, which means grave wax, a waxy substance that can form during human decomposition. There's been photos posted like this. A lot of people claim that that's a ghost in the window. What I do know is that she was alone in that room looking outside with no escape. And they believe that she removed her clothes because she got too cold, and that's like a thing that happens during hypothermia. So you have to ask yourself, did they really look for her? Because 42 days and they couldn't find her? I don't buy it.
Want to hear something scary? This is a Reddit story of horrifying experience in the Appalachian Mountains. My uncle, Mom's brother, has had a farm in southeast WV since the 70s. Long before I came into this world. Mom is the oldest of 5, and my uncle built a bunch of houses on the farm so family could use it whenever. Some lived there, and other, like my family, visited often. My mom and older sister and I would go for weeks on end to spend time with family, and I always loved it because I have a ton of cousins and was the baby for a long time, so mostly I tagged along with my cousins and felt extremely safe, like it was my happy place. I don't really remember anything totally out of the ordinary when I was really little, other than I remember an imaginary friend whom I exclusively played with at the farm, nowhere else. And we moved extensively for Dad's job, so I've lived in many different places. What I remember after age 5 was suddenly being old enough to not have to have someone walk me to and from other houses, which I thought was so cool. So I used to explore. My uncles liked to bow hunt and had taken me a few times, not too far into the woods, so I was able to go back on my own and find their little tree platforms they had built to hunt from. I thought they were cool little tree houses. It was the winter. I wanted to be out in the snow and explore, so I found my way up the mountain. That is what I called it, but in fact it was probably just a massive hill, and into the trees. I couldn't find the spot I was looking for, and got pretty frustrated with my 8-year-old self. So I sat down by a creek to catch my breath and figure out where I was. I couldn't have been sitting for more than about 3 minutes when something let out a scream I can only describe as blood-curdling. I thought it was a fox, most likely, until I heard another voice crying, just weeping and wailing, and the sorrow was palpable. My cousins had always told scary stories about Appalachia, and I figured that they had followed me into the woods and were trying to scare the pants off me for shits and giggles. I called out, like, okay guys, not funny. Okay, I'm going home, enough. And followed my footprints in the snow as fast as I could back to the farm. The screaming and crying didn't stop. Stayed consistent as I moved, which really made me convinced it had to be my cousins. I don't think I heard words, just crying and screaming, but it wasn't pleasant. Made my way back to the main house, my uncle's house, which was the biggest on the property and visible from the edge of the woods, and I absolutely booked it. Ran full tilt to get to the kitchen door. I remember getting through the door and slamming it behind me because I was a combo of terrified and annoyed that my cousins were playing a prank on me. The next closest cousin in age is 9 years older than me, and so I was often the butt of pranks. Well, wouldn't you know, every family member was accounted for in the living room/kitchen. The older male cousins and my uncles were in the kitchen putting on their snow boots and coats to come look for me. I had apparently been gone for several hours, and they were worried. According to my mom, I was white-faced. My hands were covered in scratches through my mittens. I guess I must have fallen or something. They were so worried I had disappeared. I should add, I set off from my aunt's to walk to my uncle's and had decided to take a detour and didn't tell anyone. Oops. I was 8 and really didn't think about how that might be bad. Mom said I looked like I had seen a ghost. I asked if anyone had come out into the woods to look for me. They said no. We've been looking at the different houses, and we're just about to come look for you, because they saw my footprints head into the woods. I told them about where I went and what I heard, and my uncle, whose property it was, said, oh shit, I think you've probably ran into the witch. I'm over here thinking, oh, some crazy lady lives in the woods, and I probably stumbled near her cottage. Nope, the witch was just what they called the unknown entity that roamed the woods. Screaming, crying, mimicking people's voices, and just giving people a good old sense of doom and dread. No one had a straight answer about possible folklore or anything like that, but all my older cousins had their own experiences with similar happenings over the years. It scared the living daylights out of me, and while I've been back to the farm over the years, I can tell you I have never once set foot near the woods tree line, even as an adult. I was grateful my family didn't think I was crazy, but they said a general rule is to not be in the woods alone, so I listened. To my knowledge, nothing physical ever happened with anyone in this entity, more of a prankster than anything. But oof, the Appalachia has some wild stuff. I definitely remember some strange stuff happening during the week we had my aunt's funeral when I was 21, and random voices or red eyes or smoke apparitions on the wood's edge. But I never went to check them out after that one incident. Edit. I should add that 100% of the family that was at the farm that trip was accounted for at my uncle's house, getting ready to come look for me. So if it was anything other than something supernatural, it was not from anyone staying at the farm.
Get ready with me while I tell you guys this ghost story. This story was sent into my email, and if you have any ghost stories, paranormal encounters, or scary stories that you want to share, you can send them to the email in my bio. This happened years ago when I still lived with my parents in a house that on the surface didn't ever scream weird or creepy. It looked just like any other home in the neighborhood, but I doubt the other people living in those homes were experiencing what we were. See, in the haunted house that I grew up with, it was very assuming, okay? The kids called it the witch house, all right? So I knew something was gonna go on in there. When you have a house that on the outside looks fine, looks unassuming, those are the worst because it catches you by surprise. Inside this home, there were pockets of discomfort, areas where I swore I could feel eyes on me, or where I'd try my hardest to convince myself that what I just heard was simply the house settling. You know it wasn't the house settling. You know, and I know it wasn't the house settling. One night eventually came, though, that I simply couldn't ignore it anymore. I had gone out somewhere that evening, and by the time I got back home, it was already dark. It must have been around 8 or 9, and my boyfriend was waiting for me to return at my parents' house. As it happens, he was the only one there, or at least that's what we both thought. As I was driving home, my phone rang, and it was him. When I answered, I noticed that he sounded nervous. He wasn't being his normal, jokey, fun self with me. He genuinely sounded on edge. The first thing he asked after I answered was, "Is your brother home?" I was confused. I told him I didn't think so, but I called my mom to double check. She was also confused and said that he shouldn't be home. He was at his girlfriend's house, and he'd been there all evening. So I texted my boyfriend and told him what she had said, and he almost immediately texted back saying, "No, I just saw him." At this point, I called him back and was sure that he was making a joke now, but he wasn't laughing. He kept insisting that he had physically just seen my brother. According to him, he was sitting in the house in my room when he watched my brother walk right past my bedroom door. He said it had to have been him. It looked exactly like him. So there's really no way it couldn't have been him. So naturally, my boyfriend tried speaking to him, just a casual hey, but whoever or whatever it was didn't respond. It just kept walking, straight down the hallway towards my brother's room. But just before the figure reached the bedroom, the hallway lights suddenly flickered, on and off, and then it was gone. Just disappeared into thin air. On the phone, he kept repeating the same thing over and over. I know what I saw. He's feeling real crazy right now. He's feeling really crazy because he just saw this and literally everybody's like, dude, he's not home. He's not home. He's at his girlfriend's. And he's like, but I'm here and I saw him. At that point, I was freaked out. My boyfriend isn't someone who scares easily. He's not the type to panic over every strange noise or even really believe in the unexplained. So the fact that he was so frazzled made me on edge. I tried to find an excuse. Maybe he was tired. Maybe he thought he saw someone. Maybe it was a trick of the light. There had to be some sort of logical explanation here. But because I'd always felt strange things in that house too, it continued to bother me. Years passed, and eventually my boyfriend and I got our own apartment. And the experience became one of those weird stories that we'd occasionally bring up. One day we were back visiting at my parents' house. We'd been there a while, so at some point my boyfriend went upstairs to take a nap. I stayed downstairs talking with everyone, and a little while later I got a text message. Babe, were you in the room? I was confused. It was a weird message to me. He would know if I were actually in the room, wouldn't he? So I replied no. And a few seconds later, another message came through. And when I read it, I felt sick. Babe, while I was trying to sleep, I felt someone playing with my hair. No. I don't know what movie it was. There's a movie, and I think she's in the shower. And she's taking a shower and she's washing her hair and there's a hand in it. That image is like burned in my head for the rest of my life and I hate it. He came downstairs a little bit later and he genuinely looked shaken. He explained that he'd been lying in bed with his eyes closed, trying to drift off, when he felt fingers moving through his hair, slowly and gently. I'm freaked. At first, he thought it was me. That's why he had texted. But when I told him I wasn't upstairs, he immediately sat up. The room was empty. Nobody was there. At least no one he could see. When he told my mom what happened, she didn't really know what to say, and neither did I. Because suddenly it wasn't just one strange experience that we could try and explain away anymore. Now there were two incidences, and they were years apart. Right. Once they start stacking up, that's when you know. That's when you know, because now it's not just like a one-off, like, oh yeah, like one time this really weird thing happened to me. No. Now there's multiple things going on. To this day, occasionally, when he happens to be at that house by himself, why are y'all still leaving that man in that home alone? He'll still mention feeling uneasy. He feels as if someone is watching him from another room or waiting for him to have his guard down. Y'all are wrong for leaving that man in that house alone again. Y'all are wrong for that.
I took this photo of my son over 20 years ago. I was home alone with him while he was in his playpen and I took a photo. Long before I took this picture, I had always had the feeling I was being watched in my own house, and I would often feel a weird presence right behind me. I never paid too much attention to it until I developed this photo, and it confirmed everything I felt before. I took this photo of my college roommate. Our dorm always felt freezing cold no matter how warm it was outside. Aside from that, I had sleep paralysis on many occasions, but just chalked it up to the stress of being in college and away from home. The weird thing is, though, I feel like I can recall a sleep paralysis episode where I saw this exact figure behind my friend.
This is a picture of my best friend's dad down in Texas. When she took this photo and went back to look at it, she noticed this blurry face, or whatever it is, next to him. There was no editing done to this photo whatsoever. Their family has had many paranormal experiences, and this picture still creeps me out. There was somebody banging on my window last night, and I woke up to this. I live on the 13th floor.
I never believed in the paranormal until this happened. Welcome to the Creepy Cozy Cottage, where creepy and cozy meet. So grab a blanket and get cozy, because it's creepy cozy time at the Creepy Cozy Cottage. Give me a follow so you never miss a story. My family went on a mini vacation for my dad's birthday. We live in NorCal and had decided to take the small trip to a very small beach town off of Highway 1. It was a beautiful multi-unit Airbnb that was positioned not too far from an ocean cliffside. When I got out of the car, I immediately felt strange. My brother said he felt a weird vibe from the property as well, but we chalked it up to being in an unfamiliar area so late at night. We chose not to say anything to our parents. It was about midnight, so we quickly unpacked and went to sleep. The next morning, I finally got to get a proper look at the whole property, and although I thought it was breathtakingly beautiful, I still couldn't shake the feeling of being deeply unsettled. There was a Hobbit-style structure built into the side of a hill that had a big handwritten sign that stated, "Do not enter." A huge barn/workshop that we were told not to enter by the owner of the property. 3 different units and a flat wooden lookout structure right next to the cliffside that had 0 barriers. My brother and I were staying in the smallest unit, and my parents and 2 family friends were staying in the largest unit. Nobody even went inside the last unit. We didn't initially plan on avoiding the last unit altogether, but after the incidents, we all felt like that unit didn't need to be explored. The only strange occurrence that happened on the first day was that my dad and his friends swear they saw a figure in the window of the barn. There was no host staying on the property with us, so it really startled them and led them to investigate. The first thing to note is that when they approached the barn, the figure was still in the window, completely motionless. They both thought it could be a tarp or a coat rack, considering they didn't note any movement, but still wanted to investigate to make sure. They saw this figure in the window that was positioned near the apex of the roof. So when they walked up to the barn and saw there was only 1 story, they immediately were very perplexed about what they were seeing. They walked back a few steps to look inside the window again, but now nothing was there, no figure, nothing. They both got spooked and tried to investigate further, but the doors were locked and they never came up with a proper explanation. During the day, we went on a hike and shopped around local shops. At one of these stores, they had a variety of jade jewelry. I randomly felt inclined to buy something. I don't tend to wear a lot of jewelry due to my sensory problems, but I just felt drawn to buying this bracelet with a large jade gemstone. The storekeeper told me that jade was a protection stone and that it will protect me when I choose to wear it. I immediately put it on and didn't plan on taking it off anytime soon. I found it brought me comfort knowing I was protected. That night, we all started talking about the weird vibe of the property and discussed what we thought it was. I told everyone a big red flag for me was that my dog refused to enter the unit my brother and I were staying in. He has separation anxiety and would normally never willingly leave my side, but actively avoided entering that unit. He would stand outside of the unit and watch me instead of sitting with me inside. I dragged him inside a few times, but every time he would start scratching at the door to leave, so I stopped trying. I assumed he maybe wanted access to all the family members, but it still felt uncharacteristic for him. In my unit, there was a couch that was positioned right in front of the sliding glass doors that faced the cliffside. I was lounging on that side of the couch while crocheting, attempting to relax, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I was aware my dog was probably outside, but I don't normally feel unsettled by his lurking, so I investigated with my brother. We scanned the area with flashlights and called for my dog's name. He came running out of my parents' unit. We brought him back inside and asked them if he had been there long. My mom said he had been in there with them for at least 20 to 30 minutes. I told her I felt like I was being watched through the sliding glass windows, but convinced myself and her it was probably just anxiety. We all decided to lock up for the night and just went to sleep. The next day was fairly normal, nothing to note, until nightfall. I once again was crocheting on the couch, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I didn't investigate this time. I just kept periodically looking up to make sure I didn't see anybody and continued crocheting. I ended up staying up much later than my brother. Therefore, I was all by myself with this sickening feeling I just couldn't get rid of. About 2 a.m., I just couldn't sit there any longer. I honestly felt really scared to go to sleep too, but at least I didn't feel on display in bed. I locked all of the doors and even added a secondary lock to the sliding glass door. For context, my bed was positioned right alongside the wall of the bedroom my brother was staying in, and was practically right in front of the stairs. I was not really in a bedroom. There were no doors or walls separating me from the downstairs, more like an open space that had a bed. I got into bed and was doom scrolling when I suddenly heard movement downstairs. It started with small footsteps, almost childlike, around the kitchen and the living room. I could very distinctly hear the small thuds that almost sounded like skipping or dancing. Then I heard metal clanking sounds. It was as if someone was holding a metal utensil and dragging it along the surfaces downstairs. Dragging turned into tapping. I was fully frozen with fear at this point, quite literally had no idea what to do. At no point did I hear any doors open or locks turn, so whatever was downstairs was probably in the house the whole time. It just kept going, and I knew there was absolutely nothing in between me and whatever was making all that sound downstairs. Then the worst happened. I tried to adjust my position in bed, and my phone fell off. The sound echoed through the house. I immediately went to pick it up while simultaneously hearing the footsteps abruptly stop. To my horror, I hear the tiny footsteps running up the stairs. It was the most terrifying moment of my life. I grabbed my pillow and threw it over my head and just started saying, "Please don't hurt me," repeatedly. I honestly did not want to face whatever it was. I heard the footsteps run up all the stairs and then right next to my bed. Then I start to feel pressure on my pillow. Whatever it was potentially trying to suffocate me. I continued to plead through the pillow and found I genuinely could not move. I have no idea if I was just so scared that I literally froze or if something else was stopping me, but nevertheless I lay there completely hopeless. This continued for a short while until I must have blacked out because I woke up the next morning in complete shock of what took place the night before. I had no memory of what happened after feeling pressure on the pillow. I ran to my parents' unit to tell them what I experienced, and they too had horrifying experiences the night before. My dad had moved the couch halfway through the night because he was keeping my mom up with his snoring. My mom woke up a few hours later to who she thought was my dad standing at the foot of the bed. She casually asked what he was doing just standing there, but the figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching over her. After feeling certain it wasn't my dad, she screamed. Once my dad came running in, the figure simply just vanished. She told my dad what she saw, and he said that he never even fell asleep because he kept hearing heavy footsteps walking through the house, sometimes sounding like it was right behind him. I hate to do this, but I'm going to have to make a part 2, so I will upload it the same time I upload this one. You can just go and watch it immediately. This is part 2 of the terrifying story titled, "I Didn't Believe in Paranormal Things Until This Happened." So I'm just going to jump right back into it. My dad said every time he turned to look to see who it was, he never saw anything that could explain the footsteps. He couldn't get himself to relax enough to fall asleep, so he just laid there in the dark. Since it was already 4 a.m., they both stayed up watching movies and discussing what they experienced. My brother and the family friends didn't experience anything of note. They all know that we are skeptics and aren't lying for attention, so they really didn't know what to make of what we claimed. The most damning thing that nobody could explain was that my jade bracelet had changed colors. It was a light milky green before, and now there was a large spot of the main stone that was very dark green/black. It wasn't on the surface of the stone either. We tried washing it. It was literally as if the color of the stone changed. Scientifically speaking, that can happen due to wear, temperature changes, skin oils, or lighting. But I had just bought it, and the color change didn't go away after being brought to different conditions. Spiritually speaking, some believe the stones can change after absorbing negative energy, almost like a sign that it had done its job. I became convinced that a man lived there and would unalive people. I know I was probably jumping to conclusions, but it all made so much sense. The house was so isolated, and the cliff was the perfect unaliving spot. I'm pretty sure my parents had an encounter with unaliver, and I had one with the victim. It didn't even feel like a question at that point. It felt like I just knew deep down that evil things had happened on that property. It might sound crazy, but this was my experience. I think about this experience regularly and don't talk about it much. Most people look at me like I'm crazy after sharing, so I just stopped talking about it. It was horrifying, and I most certainly believe in the paranormal now. Let me know what you thought, and if you have any scary stories of your own you'd like me to read, just send me a DM.
I recently came across another Brujeria story time that was originally in Spanish. I'm going to translate it to English. The story was originally submitted by a woman, let's call her Maria. Maria had a best friend named Lucy that she had grown up with. They were completely inseparable. Their friendship was great. The only problem was that Maria had a crush on Lucy's boyfriend. For a really long time, she tried to fight back those feelings because she knew she was in the wrong. Like, how could she have fallen in love with her best friend's boyfriend? Like, that's her best friend. This is wrong. So she tried to kind of like hold back those feelings, but as time went on, it just got stronger and stronger. And she became very jealous and envious of Lucy because she was like, why does she get him? Like, why can't I have him? Like, I'm prettier. Like, I'm better. I'm smarter. Like, what makes Lucy so special? One day, Maria's sitting at school. This happened, they were like in high school. Maria's sitting at school talking to one of her other friends from school, and she confesses this huge secret that she is in love with Lucy's boyfriend. The random girl that she happens to be talking to at school did not like Lucy. She had always been jealous of Lucy because Lucy has always been like an overachiever and she always got like a lot of attention. She was kind of popular, so that girl kind of felt some type of way. So she told Maria that there was nothing wrong with it, that she was totally normal for her to feel that way towards her best friend, and that if she wanted a little extra help, that she knew a person. Apparently there was a woman in the neighborhood that practiced witchcraft that was known. That classmate went ahead and gave Maria the information to that bruja. Maria, thinking that she didn't really have much to lose, she decided to go and visit this bruja. She goes ahead and tells the bruja the whole story. The bruja kind of looks at her and stares and goes, I can definitely help you with that. Maria then goes ahead and expresses how guilty she feels because she knows this is wrong, but she can't stop thinking about Lucy's boyfriend. The bruja then tells her, it's not a big deal. Like, you have no idea the type of things that people come here and ask for me to help them with. This is nothing. Solidified the fact that Maria was kind of like, all right, then I guess I'm not that in the wrong because now two people have told me that I'm like, that it's not a big deal. The bruja goes and asks Maria for a few items, like clothing items. She needs some of Lucy's hair, like a bunch of things. Maria goes ahead and starts working on it. She gets the stuff to the bruja starts working on things. Not long after, Lucy calls Maria really excited and says, can you believe my boyfriend just proposed to me? I'm engaged. Maria, of course, fakes that she's happy for her, but in the inside, she's like freaking out because she's like, what the heck? I'm paying this bruja all this money. Like, why isn't it working? So she calls the bruja and tells her, like, what's going on? Like, why hasn't anything worked? And the bruja tells her, just be patient. It is working. Just give it some time. Fast forward to Lucy's birthday. Her parents end up gifting her a motorcycle. Lucy was extremely happy about this motorcycle. She would drive around. She loved to speed in it. One day she actually ends up crashing this motorcycle, but the crash was so horrific that when she hit the ground, her whole face like scraped on the concrete and it literally ripped apart like her nose, her eye, like half of her face was gone because she wasn't wearing a helmet. As it turns out, that accident was a product of the brujeria that Lucy had done on her. As Lucy is at the hospital recovering, Maria gets closer to her boyfriend, and Maria notices that the boyfriend is actually flirting with her. Like, she catches him staring at her sometimes and like just making like comments where Maria's like, oh my god, I think he might actually be into me. Not long after, the boyfriend decides to kind of make a move on Maria and they get together. When Lucy finds out, she's of course devastated because not only is her life falling apart with the accident, now she also lost her boyfriend to her best friend. Fast forward a few years, Maria and the boyfriend stay together. They actually end up getting married. Things are good. The only issue that Maria says is the fact that the boyfriend, or her now husband, is extremely jealous. Super jealous. Like, she can't even go to the store and like order something because the moment she'll walk back, he'll be like, oh, why were you looking at the server for so long? Or why were you staring at him? Or like, why were you talking to him? Like, she literally, like, he would be jealous of her over every little thing. She ends up getting pregnant and she tries to kind of continue to work on the relationship, but his jealousness and aggressiveness just gets worse until one day he completely snapped, and a fit of rage or a fit of jealousy, he physically assaults her to the point where she ends up losing the baby. After this, of course, she calls the cops. They get involved. The guy's actually in jail right now. After all of this took place, she becomes extremely depressed and is told that she can never get pregnant due to the way that she lost the baby. She then, not long after, gets sick and is diagnosed with cervical cancer, and her whole life just fell apart. She now lives for her mom and feels like there's no reason for her to even be here anymore. Like, she's just really going through it, I guess, mentally. And that's pretty much where the story ends. She wanted her best friend's boyfriend, ruined her best friend's life, ruined the boyfriend's life as well, because he became cuckoo, because you can't force love. So he probably went psycho crazy because of the stuff that she did to him. Lost her baby. She can't have any kids. Now has cervical cancer. And yeah, I make these stories as like cautionary tales, because a lot of people don't believe in this stuff, but it's real. And also so that people know not to mess with it.
My girlfriend and I went to my grandmother's old house and we saw this in the window. I'm completely unsure if this is even something paranormal, but it really feels like it is. A friend's mom spotted this in her photos after visiting Holmwood House in Glasgow. There was nobody else in the house. They were there first thing in the morning and they were the very first visitors. It wasn't a mannequin or an employee either. The woman who took the photo is absolutely not the kind of person who could or would doctor a photo. She's an extremely genuine and honest person with no interest in ghosts and no experience with Photoshop. And if it's pareidolia, then it's uncannily human-like. My family and I visited the old Melbourne jail in December of 2019, and I took this photo that was supposed to be of my children. At the time, we kind of wondered about the strange-looking figure in the background, but didn't think too much of it. The topic came back up a few days ago, and my daughter was telling me about Cell 17, the most haunted cell. We realized that the figure in the photo was standing directly outside of Cell 17. She was also convinced that it looked like he was wearing a mask that prisoners wore when they were being. My daughter also pointed out that anytime I take photos of them, I'm always very careful to make sure nobody's in the background. So it kind of sounds like this figure wasn't even there in the moment and only appeared after we took the photo.
According to a follower from Croatia, her grandfather spent 40 years fishing with a man who never seemed to age, and to this day, nobody in the family nor her grandfather could ever explain why that was. So this story was sent to me by a follower who I am going to call Katerina, and she told me that this happened to her late grandfather named Luka, and he spent most of his life fishing at the Sava River in Zagreb, Croatia. And according to her, her grandfather had been fishing there pretty much since the time he was 15 years old. The river was his second home, right? He knew every bend. He knew every place that the fish would like to hide out. He knew everything. And over the years, he became friends with dozens of the regular fishermen there. But there was one man that he said stood out from everybody else. And according to Luka, he first met him when they were around the age of 30. And this man was absolutely impossible to forget, he would say. He was unusually tall, very, very well fit, dark hair. He always had a very, very well-kept, neat beard, and he was always well-dressed, even when standing in knee-deep mud beside the river. This guy was always well put together, and Luka would actually joke around with him at how well he always looked. Now, the two quickly became friends. They would fish together for hours on end. They would share sandwiches, drink a beer together, swap stories. And then one day, the man just simply stopped showing up. And Luka had assumed that maybe he'd found another fishing spot. And as always, life went on. And nearly 20 years later, Luka was back at the same stretch of river when someone called out his name. And he turned around, and there stood his old fishing partner, smiling, and as if only maybe a week had passed since he last seen him. The man greeted him warmly and asked, hey, how has life been? But according to Luka, something immediately felt a little off about this, because while nearly 20 years had passed, The man hasn't changed one bit. Not a single gray hair, not one wrinkle on the face, not even a different type of hairstyle. He literally looked exactly the same as he did the day that Luca first met him and the last day that Luca seen him. Luca laughed and had asked him, where he disappeared to all these years, and the man casually replied and was like, oh, I spent some time in Austria. And that was it. No other explanation, and they fished together for several days after that. Then the man disappeared again, and for nearly 10 years after that, Luca was like, where the heck has this guy gone? He up and goes. And then by this time, Luca was now in his 60s, and his hair had turned completely gray. His face was lined from decades in the sun. And then one morning, while he was out there fishing again, standing in the exact same spot, there was the man, looking the exact same. Same face, same clothes, same smile. Luca joked and had said to him, I've only had one beer, but, you still haven't aged a day. Something's off about this. The man laughed and simply just said, yeah, the sea air, it's been good to me. And again, nothing more was said about that. They spent a few mornings after that day fishing together and catching up on the years past, and then, once again, the man had vanished. 10 more years passed again, and by now Luca was well into his 70s. His health was actually starting to decline a little bit, but he still made time to visit the river whenever he could and whenever he felt up to it. And one morning, while out there fishing, lo and behold, the man showed up again. The exact same. Not older, not heavier, not skinnier, not different in any way. Luca couldn't hide his disbelief anymore, and he smiled and said to the man, this time I even had a beer, so you got to tell me the truth. How have you not changed in all of these years? The man just laughed, picked up one of the fish that they had caught, and he said, eat more fish. That's the secret. Eat more fish. And went about it. And then he changed the subject, and according to Katerina, that was the last time that her grandfather ever saw this man again. Years later, while going through old family photographs, they found one taken that day that Luca caught the largest carp of his life. And it was a catch that he was even featured in one of the local newspapers for. And standing right beside him was that same mysterious fisherman looking exactly as he had decades earlier. Katerina told me that her grandfather never believed in ghosts or anything supernatural or no like vampires or immortals or nothing like that. But he simply said that there was no explanation for as to why this guy looked the same all these years. And only one question that stayed with her grandfather for the rest of his life was, how do you spend 40 years knowing someone who never grows old and you have to act like it's normal? So I don't know. Tell me what you think. Was this just an incredible coincidence? Did the guy have phenomenal genetics? Or did Lucas spend decades fishing with someone who wasn't living by the same rules as the rest of us? Let me know what you guys think in the comments.
I was putting one box into the bag and felt my body and brain freeze with the word no, but I didn't hear anything. Hey y'all, this is Last Thread Before Bed, episode 21. This is a little series where I read scary stories off Reddit before I go to bed, and my ass tries not to get nightmares. So boom, let's get into it. So tonight's story is from the subreddit Ghost Stories thread, and the username is Operation Tiny 9461, and the title of the story is I'm an Undertaker and Something Happened. Something happened and I've always been skeptical, until today. I am an Undertaker and I have been for the past 8 years. I've always been skeptical when it comes to the afterlife, especially the paranormal. But today, something happened that I cannot explain. I was cleaning unclaimed ashes out of the funeral home where I work. We are moving
might have known the story of real-life boogeyman.
Out of the old Victorian building we operate out of into a new funeral home. For the past week, we have been making a slow transition, moving out of our current home into our new one. In our basement, we have unclaimed ashes going as far back as the 1970s. I just had my headphones in, putting the boxes into bags so we can send them to the local crematorium for them to be scattered. That's what y'all do with them? Okay, I digress. I must have put hundreds of boxes of ashes without even thinking about it. I was just listening to a podcast, getting another task ticked off my to-do list. I was putting one box into the bag and felt my body and brain freeze with the word no,
but I didn't hear anything. It's hard to explain what I felt. The best I can explain is that my own free will had gone, and I was ordered to stop what I was doing. I stopped immediately and put the boxes of ashes into my hand on the table. On closer inspection, there were 2 boxes I was going to put in 2 separate bags. One small box and one normal sized one. Let's just say for privacy reasons, one box was labeled Hannah Williams. On top of Hannah Williams' ashes, there was a box labeled Baby Williams. I presume they are mother and baby, who I was about to separate into 2 separate bags, which I find quite spooky because I didn't read the labels before. I was doing a mundane task as fast as I could with my existing duties in clearing the premises. I was just trying to get things done as fast as possible and was not paying attention to the names. I just needed to get this done. So yeah, I can't explain this for the life of me. Cannot come up with an explanation for this. I'm not scared, nor am I excited about what I felt. I just feel confused about the whole situation. So a user named Ghost Syrup replies to this thread and says, "To me, this is a very powerful illustration of the continuation of consciousness after physical death. Mom didn't want her remains separated from her child's and firmly told you so. Simple and profound as that." Let me know your thoughts. Follow for more scary stories. Good night.